talk about ethical storytelling, that you have to ask yourself first, like, are there cultural repercussions for bad storytelling? Are there cultural repercussions for depicting minorities in ways that are damaging? And the answer is obviously yes, right? Like, throughout the history of time, from the very beginning of recorded stories, our perception of people who are not like us is shaped by the stories that people tell. And, you know, I had the amazing experience to speak to some teenagers at a high school recently, and I asked, we were talking about media representation, and I said, where have you seen trans women on TV? And they were like, Law and Order, SVU, all of them, right? Like, right? And it's just, the ethics of storytelling are so important because, especially when you're talking about queer people, this is a hugely important thing right now. In 2008, GLAAD started measuring marriage equality against the number of gay characters on television, right? And what they found out, year by year, there is a direct increase. Every year, 0.5% more characters were lesbian, gay, and bisexual, and every year, 2% more Americans supported marriage equality. And when GLAAD called and they said, hey, why do you all of a sudden support marriage equality? They were like, well, because of Kurt Hummel, you know? Like, they saw these TV characters come into their life, they became like real people to them, and they were like, I think Santana and Brittany should be able to get married, you know? Like, it becomes very real to you. So yes, like, if a story, the worst thing a storyteller can say is like, it's just a story. Like, it's not just a fucking story. There's no such thing as just a story. And so if it's true, and it is true, then we can start talking about, like, okay, then what is the responsibility of the storyteller?
Right. I will get slightly, I guess, maybe slightly technical here. My background is in linguistics, primarily. And so stories matter partly because of the way our brain functions. Like, our brain is incredibly lazy. It is, and that is because it is much more efficient for your brain to be lazy. And the way that, like, stories create what I call meaning pathways. Both linguistically, if you think about, you know, what is, you know, a word could have 5 different meanings. Well, how do you know which it means in context? Is your brain remembers, well, this word is used in this context, this other word is used in this other one. And the more common words or meanings are going to have the deepest ruts in your brain. And so those are going to be harder to change. But we know that they can change because the more you interact with a new meaning, a new story, it wears away at that deep rut, and suddenly you can change the meaning of something the more you interact with a new interpretation of it. And that's why stories matter, because we can change the way people think. This is how our brains function. We know it scientifically. This is how things work. And so that is why stories matter, because stories literally change the way that your brain functions and what you think about. And so if we can start telling more and more stories about ourselves, I love that you just brought that up, that, like, we change minds by telling new stories and people interacting with those stories in new ways over a span of time.
And that brings us to is this on?
It is, yes.
Okay. That brings us to the concept of the trope, obviously, as well, because that's a term from literary studies, and that's these little pieces of stories that authors of literature have used for ages, that we all know and love, some of them, you know, such as the meet cute, you know, that we know from movies, and something, the couple has to meet each other some way. And so there are these little shortcuts, kind of the same sort of pathways,
right? Yeah.
That we have little pieces of stories that we kind of think of the same way as words, almost, that have little snippets of meaning. And the sort of opposite problem, you know, that it's hard to change those ruts that have formed once they've already formed. And so that's kind of the problem that we have with these tropes, is they've already been worn over for so many years. And so to actually create the capacity to change that, I think that's kind of what we're talking about here at the con in general.
Right, and if you're not, I think what people also fail to realize is if you're not subverting the story, you're in some sense reintegrating that story. If you're not consciously subverting a story, your brain is just automatically going to keep going down that pathway that it has established.
Right, I mean, like, how did Donald Trump get elected? He got elected by telling the story that we see on TV, and then the story that Fox News repeats over and over and over again. When we see black men on television, 94% of the time, they're criminals, right? And so then you get Donald Trump saying black on black crime. Or when you see, the New York Times did this article a couple days after the election where they had all of these people who write Muslim characters, and all of them write Muslim characters as terrorists. And they were like, do you feel a responsibility about this? And they were like, well, the network wants terrorists, and they want them to be Muslim, right? So, like, these, if you're not subverting it, exactly what you're saying, you're allowing these monstrous situations to rise up. And if you, for example, if you live in the middle of the country and you don't know any Muslim people, and so all you see on TV is Muslim terrorists, and then you get Fox News every time they're showing a person who's a Muslim, calling them a terrorist who has radical Islamic terrorism or whatever. It's just continuing to feed into that rut, and it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And so it feels, even though it's not the truth, it feels like the truth to you because it's a lie that's just been told over and over and over again.
Yeah, the absence of contradiction is in some sense a reinforcement.
Right.
So if you never see happy, like even if you like write a queer character who like, if you're not giving them a happy ending, you're not consciously subverting the idea that queer people always have tragic stories. Like if you just say, well, like, but they just have a neutral story. I'm like, yeah, but that still reinforces the idea that like queer people do not have happy endings. Like, and that's, I think, what people fail to recognize, that the absence of contradiction is a reinforcement of the trope, of the already established meaning. And that, like we keep saying, that's why this is important, because there are established tropes, especially attached to queer people. And if we're not consciously subverting them, we're just reinforcing the tropes that already exist.
That's what makes it a trope, this accrual over time.
Yeah.
It's not that any particular artist is participating in a trope, it's just that either the absence of subverting it or actively contributing to it, just the act of making the characters do this automatically contributes to it, whether they have any intention behind it or not. And I think that's something that I actually want to get to in the panel today is this, for instance, and I'm going to say the Rothenberg word, but where he, the quasi or pseudo apology tour that he went on. Yes, we all remember. After in the press, after the 307, where he pseudo apologized and talked about his intention behind what he was trying to do with that episode. And the thing about that is that whatever the author's intention was doesn't really matter because the impact is greater than the intent. It's always the case. And so whatever his intention might have been of, not baiting the audience or whatever, because I think he obviously is not going to use the term queer baiting because we all would have really jumped on that. But saying he was not trying to bait the audience, well, that doesn't matter because we were baited. And that was the effect that happened. And so, whatever his intention was irrelevant because that's what happened.
Right. Like what we're saying is that once a trope becomes established, it's just so easy to fall into the trope, right? So, like Lexa was really the turning point. There were a lot of factors that made Lexa the turning point, but when Lexa died, after Lexa, 24 more characters have died since then. 24 more lesbian and bisexual characters have died since then. And in the total of history of lesbian and bisexual women on TV, there have been 172 who have died. So 24 in the last year. So that's 15% of all deaths just in the last year, just since Lexa died. And so the thing is that it just becomes so common. And you saw this after Lexa's death, where all of these characters died, and these showrunners are like, we didn't know about Lexa yet. No one here knew, but like you knew that lesbians were continuing to die and bisexual women were continuing to die. And choosing not to subvert that at some point, luckily reached this breaking point, and sadly, we've lost a lot of characters since then.
But that's why we're all here.
Exactly.
Right. Where does that leave the responsibility for artists, since so many have happened in 2016 and even before and after that?
Well, I think when you have an established trope like barrier gaze, because whether they want to acknowledge it or even understand it or not, barrier gaze has existed for close to 100 years. This is not a brand new trope. This was a trope primarily in literature, especially in the middle of the 20th century, where there was a lot of censorship in written media, things like comic books and written novels, where like it was okay to depict a gay man or a lesbian woman so long as they did not get a happy ending. And the reason that existed was because giving them a happy ending was an endorsement. It meant that this was now an okay thing for the children to do, and they were just not okay with that. And so it was like, fine, have a lesbian romance, but both of them have to have some kind of tragic ending. Typically what would happen is a lot of times the lesbian character would get killed off, and then the other woman, who was probably bisexual, might go crazy. She might also die, or she might end up married to a man. And so and that was where barrier gaze came out of, was this idea that stories about non-heterosexual characters had to have a tragic ending. They had to die, otherwise it would be like telling kids it's okay to be non-straight. And this has existed for a long time. So whether these creators want to say they didn't mean it, this was an established trope before Lexa. This is not Lexa's fault that this trope exists. Right. It existed for 70 years.
And it wasn't you're not saying it's just sort of generally accepted. I mean, it was literally if you wanted the stamp of approval from the Comics Code Authority, you had to follow the written rule, and the written rule was no gay characters with happy endings.
Yep.
And allow me to plug my presentation that I'm going to be doing tomorrow about this very subject, which I'm going to talk about queer history even before film and media, and I'll go into some of the origins, even in the legal medical community that led up to film history. So
all that to say is they are responsible precisely because this is a well-established trope. And as we've been saying, well-established tropes, if you are not contradicting it, you are reinforcing it. And they're not just reinforcing it by lack of contradiction. They are actively participating in this trope, whether they consciously realized that is what they were doing. They were writing a story that is a part of an established trope that is harmful to our community, whether they say they knew about it beforehand or not. It's so what? So what if you didn't know about this? This is a trope that has existed for long enough that it is actively damaging.
So let's take the conversation to the writer's room. We talked about this a little bit, but TV relies on a collaborative writer's room, so what kinds of problems does that lead to? If this has existed for so long, where are we right now?
Well, this is another one where I'd like to bring in a historical perspective, because I think that the writer's room, obviously television is a collaborative medium. There is no such thing as the singular auteur or artiste who makes television, because there has to be a writer's room. There have to be different people contributing, editors, actors, you name it. There is obviously the showrunner, this idea that we have. And some of you might remember last year there was a panel at, I think it was ATX, I'm not sure, but it was called Barrier Tropes. I see some nodding heads. And I found that rather disappointing.
Super.
Obviously, Javi was the only person that really had anything kind of
meaningful
progressive to say. And who was it? The L word lady? I didn't take it. Okay. Yeah. And
Maybe some of you are familiar with that show.
perhaps. And I was expecting to hear some things from her, but basically everybody but Javi on that panel sort of stuck with this idea of the singular artistic vision, this idea of artistic integrity, which is honestly rooted in the idea of the artist that we've inherited from the Renaissance. Because that's when the artist was the painter or the sculptor, and that's when artists started signing their name to works. And that's when we developed this idea of the artist with the singular vision, with this divine gift from God, and that's where we have our idea of the artist. And so fast forward to 2016 or 2017, and so these showrunners sort of have inherited this idea of the artist, and they see themselves as these folks with a divine gift and singular vision. They probably don't say it like that in their minds, but I think that's kind of this cultural idea that we have.
But I mean, they do say it, right? Even the Rothenberg word was well, I thought that I was going to do it differently. And you see that in writers' rooms, specifically when it's a male showrunner, you see them saying, well, I thought, my thing was going to be so different than the other 172 lesbian and bisexual characters that were killed.
Fair point.
and then when you have women showrunners like Marlene King and Eileen Chagin, their thing is sort of but I'm a lesbian, so I can kill whoever I want. Right? It's still the trope. Yeah. And then you have Ryan Murphy, who's the confluence of both of those things, which is I'm a gay man, so I can just piss on literally everybody.
Well, mean, yeah, we see artists say it all the time. They talk about, well, like, this is my story and I need to tell it. I need to be true to my story. I need to be true to my vision. And I have a lot of very choice words that I won't say here for people who say that to me. Because, like, who I see say that, because it's nonsense. It's not, like, you are crafting a story for an audience. Like, you are making a story that people will watch. And I think especially with television, like, the point of television is to, like, make money for the network. Like, this isn't just, I am an artist painting my work of art that maybe hopefully someday will end up in a museum. Like, they're creating media that exists to entertain, for the audience to interact with and engage with. And to try and take that, they're imposing a vision and a perception of art that does not fit in this medium. Film and television are not the same as a person sitting down and creating a single person creating a single work of art. And we, like, I get so frustrated and kind of wordless about it that, like, we cannot allow them that conception to continue, because it ends up with they believe that they don't have to listen to their audience or even to other people in the same writer's room.
Very, very, very simple solution to this problem is to put queer people and people of color and trans people and non-binary people in your writer's room, and that way you've got, and you need more than one black woman in a writer's room, because black women are not a monolith. You need a variety of voices. I don't know if you guys are watching One Day at a Time. It's a new Netflix sitcom. You know why it's so good? It's because they have brought so many diverse, authentic perspectives in. I'm just going to plug my website, australia.com, and tell you that one of our senior editors, Yvonne Marquez, recently interviewed the writers who did the lesbian storyline on the show, and one of them is a Latino woman, and one of them is just a lesbian. They're 20 years apart. Just a lesbian.
Just a lesbian.
It's interesting because when she talked to them, they're like 20 years apart, but their cultural canon for lesbian and bisexual characters is the same. Like, who's your favorite? Willow. Like, we are. It doesn't matter how old you are as a queer woman, because there are so few stories, we've seen them all.
Yeah.
And so bringing these voices into your writer's room and having them there and then letting them tell their stories from their authentic perspective is the way that you avoid having a straight white dude be like, I've got to be true to my vision of this black trans woman. Like, no, you don't. That's not your vision. It's not your perspective.
Right, I was going to say, because you also have to be willing to listen to them and not just put them on your room for, like, brownie points. Be like, see, it's fine. I have a lesbian on my writing team. Everything's cool. It's like, well, but did you actually take their perspective into account? Did you actually listen to them? Did you let them do it? Or did you write your version and say, hey, here, put your rubber stamp on it because I'm in charge, and if you don't, then you can get fired.
Yeah, and the thing where you're just like, well, a lesbian told me it was okay. Oh, well, she does definitely speak for all.
Well, and that's what I mean about this model of the artist, because, like, on the ATX panel, then we have Eileen Shagan saying this stuff, and it's okay because I'm a lesbian. Well, no, it's not. And so, not only do we have to have this diverse team of people working on these projects, but then there also has to be a really different model of how art is created. And it has, and frankly, obviously the one that we've inherited as the singular artiste or whatever is not a feminist model. It's not. And so we need something that is truly collaborative. And when you're talking about something like One Day at a Time, for example, I think we see the results of that.
Absolutely.
And, it's been pretty successful.
Yeah, and think about One Day at a Time. It is a multi-camera sitcom with a laugh track. It should feel like it is 150 years old, and it feels like the most fresh new thing you've ever seen in your entire life. Even though it's a very old model of storytelling, it's told in a brand new way. It's so exciting.
What makes it different from others similar to it?
Well, they brought a whole bunch of people of color, like Latino and Latina people, into the writer's room to tell a story about a Cuban-American family of immigrants. They brought, they're telling a story centered on a single mom who's a woman of color. Her daughter is a lesbian. It's just,
I think they referred to autostraddle at one point.
They do. Yeah, when the teenage daughter comes out and her mom is trying very hard to sound like she's supportive, she's like, I read Autostraddle last night.
What she says in this episode is that she found out that lesbians wear monocles, and that Eleanor Roosevelt was big into monocles. And we were so excited, but then we were like, we don't have anything about Eleanor Roosevelt. So we had to have somebody write.
Art imitates life, life imitates about intent matter versus impact, and how impact matters for most of the time more than the intent. Can you talk about that a little bit more in depth?
Well, yeah, like I said, his apology tour where he talks about, I didn't, what I meant or whatever. I mean, this is something that a lot of people, they look to the person who authored a book or is the showrunner to have an opinion about their own work. And there's this concept, and I'm going to go back to literary studies because that's my deal. And so there's this concept called the death of the author, and it came along in the 1960s and 70s by this literary critic named Roland Barthes. And he talks about this idea of, and he was trying to fight back against biographical criticism, whatever, that's boring, never mind. But this idea that the opinion that an author has after releasing the work to the public is irrelevant, because it's just another opinion. And what really matters is the response of the reader, or the response of the viewer, as the case may be, because that is where the interaction takes place. That's where this dialogue takes place. That's what it was meant for viewers. It was meant for readers. It doesn't matter. You know, it's kind of like we go back to J.K. Rowling talking about Dumbledore being gay or whatever, and it's like, that's great. Where is it in the text? Mm-hmm. That's just your opinion. That's your interpretation. That's just another interpretation. I mean, you can interpret it, but
sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, no, you're right. And the thing that's made that infinitely worse is Twitter, where now a writer can just immediately go to Twitter right after and be like, but well, what I meant was, and you're like, hey, but guess what I saw on my television, and that was another lesbian getting shot with a stray bullet.
Well, if we think about this in the context of, because I'm a linguist, verbal communication. If you have an argument with, your partner, and they say something hurtful, and you say, that hurt my feelings, and they say, yeah, but what I meant was, everyone knows that what you will say is like, I understand that, and it was still hurtful.
It happened to me this morning, actually.
I can understand.
Oh. I really didn't mean how it came out, but it didn't matter. I was in the doghouse no matter what.
Oh, and first thing in the morning, too.
Impact totally crushes intent every time. There's only so many times you can say you're sorry. If you don't learn your lesson, you're not going to get to say anything. So,
right. I mean, that's really the point of this panel, right?
Right. That, like, at some level, like, okay, I can acknowledge that you didn't mean it the way I heard it, but, like, that this was how I heard it, whether you meant it that way or not. So and what I want from you is to say, I am so sorry. I will do better next time.
I'm writing it down.
I'm not talking to you. From showrunners who do that, like the reaction is not, well, let me explain to you why you should not have felt that way.
And the other problem is that of the people who are watching your show, maybe like 0.5% are watching you on Twitter. So the cultural impact is there regardless of whether or not you apologize, because now it's out in the wide world for people who are not following a fandom conversation, and all they're seeing is more dead queer characters. And they're not hearing a showrunner. Like, if you asked an average viewer about any writer's apology tour, they'd be like, well, who are you talking about? What are you talking about? So like the cultural impact goes so far beyond fandom, and that's the impact that really matters in a broader scheme, because that's the impact of the people who are making the legislation that is then coming back to like impact us. Mm-hmm.
Right. It's a lesson for all of us, especially creators who have more control than I do in just my everyday life. So in the digital age, what we're speaking on is that fans do have more access to creators. It's direct to what you were saying about Twitter. So with that being said, how does that impact how stories are received when they are courting certain audiences?
Well, I mean, the fact that this exists is like, the fact that ClexaCon exists is a perfect example of the beauty of social media and being able to come together over a television show. And I think there's so many people who came together, specifically with Lex's death. You've probably made friends that you would never have met otherwise, because you were all coming together to mourn this thing, and then using that collective power to create something like this, and to raise so much money for the Trevor Project, and to push back and push into mainstream media. To me, the most remarkable thing to come out of Lex's death was the fact that places like Entertainment Weekly and Hollywood Reporter and Variety started paying attention and writing about this thing and interviewing queer people and calling it out as a problem. Because when my grandmother can be like, I was reading like a lot of gay people get buried on television. I'm like,
where did you read that? USA Today, you know? And I've been writing about it for 10 years. 10 years I've been posting Facebook statuses about gay people, but she sees it in USA Today and she's like, I heard gay people die on television. Like that, you know, that really matters. Pushing it out really matters. And, you know.
I think that's kind of a theme of this whole weekend that we should all really kind of take a moment to appreciate is the fact that what happened over Lex's death and then the subsequent other deaths that happened after that and fan responses to that, this is unprecedented. I've been observing fandom and queer culture and all those sorts of things for the last 20 years, some of it in an intellectual capacity, some of it in a personal capacity. I've never seen anything like this, and I've followed this stuff pretty closely and published on it and researched it and all that sort of thing. And the kind of well-coordinated, surprisingly well-coordinated response that happened as a result of this, and the fact that we're all here today is just kind of mind-boggling. Like, I've had a really hard time processing even what's happening here since I got here last night, just because it's so incredible and it's so unbelievable, the fact that we were able to pull all this together and make all this happen, and the fact that we got so many mainstream media responses. I mean, did anybody catch the fact that the UN tweeted the GLAAD report, which probably got the response that it did because of all of us?
Yeah, I mean, the GLAAD report, like, GLAAD never singles out lesbians, and I've been following that GLAAD report a long time. It never singles out lesbians. So the fact that GLAAD, felt a really specific need to headline with that this year was a big deal.
And whose picture was on all those headlines?
Lexa!
The one thing I wanted to say was, we're talking about changing things in the digital age, and I think it's really important to point out that the real change maker for digital activism is the Black Lives Matter movement. And when I was watching the response to Lexa and I was watching LGBT Fans Deserve Better, I was like, this is like the Black Lives Matter movement laid the foundation and showed exactly the way to organize and to make your voice heard, and this movement went right into that groove. And the same thing is true right now as Mayrood is our trans editor here from Autostraddle, and unfortunately, very often these days, having to write obituaries for murdered trans women. And it is the trans women, specifically trans women of color and black trans women on Twitter, creating an activist community to find the information about these murdered trans women that would have slipped through the cracks, right? Twitter and digital media changes that because it gives us a platform. And I just want to specifically say it about Black Lives Matter because I think that for all the million wonderful things they did, they also modeled social media activism for us.
Right. Yeah. They provided a framework that the people responding to Lex's death was able to say, "Oh, I've seen this done." Like, I know, and that's why it felt so well organized, is because the groundwork had been laid for how you do this, how you do social media activism, that they could, in some sense, it felt almost instinctual, that they were like, oh, I know what to do now. I know what to do now because I've seen that done before.
Yeah. All grassroots liberal activism that comes after that, you can see modeled very clearly after the Black Lives Matter movement.
So what would you say what needs to happen in addition to active fans holding storytellers accountable, and obviously media holding just the community and society accountable? Like, how else are there ways that we could be active?
Well, I think, one of the other ways is we create content for ourselves. Is we don't just say, hey, you need to write our stories better. We say, we also need to write our own stories ourselves and find a place for that. And that, I think, really is the spot where we're at right now. Is like I feel like, maybe other people disagree, we've done what we can to make this issue open, talked about, and now we also need to say, it's not just about holding you accountable, it's about me saying, all right, well, because they will get the inevitable question from people who are not part of our community, well, but how do I do that? What do you mean, how do I do that? What does this look like? And so I think one of the big steps now is for us to say, here is how you do that. One of those things is having people on your writer's room. For all of anyone of any age here, space now exists that I think didn't exist a couple of years ago. Or I would say probably even a year and a half ago. There is more, because we gave ourselves a voice, there is more space. There are more people who are willing to talk about the fact that we need better stories for ourselves. and there are avenues opening up for that to happen in more of a mainstream way. And so what we can do is to then do that, is to say, you know what, I was terrified of writing that novel. I was terrified of doing that web series. I didn't think anyone would listen. I thought no one would care. But you know what? We will. Because we now know that all of us want this, that all of us need this, that you will have an audience for whatever content you want to create.
Yeah, like May, again, I'm just going to call May. At the end of the last panel that she just did on trans rep, she said the best thing that you can do if you want to see good trans rep is give money to trans women. Right? If you where you want to see that representation, find the people that are making it, and then find the people who are providing a platform for it, and then find the people who are providing the recaps and criticism for it in a way that feels authentic to you, and give them your money. Because in this, as the media landscape changes, everybody's moving to a subscription model. Everybody's moving to independent subscribers for things. So if you want to see it, like if you want one day at a time, subscribe to Netflix and then tweet at Netflix like I subscribe because I love one day at a time.
Right. Like the better we understand, I think this is a way that we can use like a capitalist system to work for us. Because the way that the way that media is created is content creators or like people in charge of it don't want to throw money at something that won't get an audience. So if we put our money where we want things to exist, then they will have the impetus to then say, oh, right, like, you can prove to me that you have X number of followers, that you have X number of people willing to invest, and so yes, we will give you that deal because we know that we will be able to make money out of it. It sucks, I hate it, but like we can use this to our advantage.
It's like the ultimate irony of Lex's death is that the creative team knew that having queer people watch their show would make a huge difference in the ratings.
We are social cachet.
We are. Right, so if you know that writing a queer character that queer women love and then convincing them to watch your show makes such a difference that you can get your show renewed, what is the logic that then makes you go, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to kill her. Like, killing her is definitely the best way to maintain what is obviously like a lucrative opportunity.
I will say that still one of my favorite images ever of the internet is the graph that shows the Twitter followers. Like, I will admit, if I'm ever feeling sad, I'll be like,
I didn't believe that was when I saw that I didn't believe it. I was like, this is a photo manipulation. There's no way that this is for real. Would it matter?
It happened over one weekend.
Yeah. And the other thing about like you were just saying that TV shows are created to make money, right? And TV shows are created to sell ad revenue. And the way that works now is that when a network is pitching to a company, they are not just saying we have X number of viewers. They're saying we have X number of viewers and X number of live watchers, and we know because we've trended on Twitter 15 weeks in a row. So the more people you have following you on Twitter and tweeting about you live, the more you can sell your ad space for, and the longer your show is going to stay on television. So
those are all really good suggestions, so thank you guys. Before we go to question and answer, just while we have your attention, I want everyone on the panel to just say that where people can follow you and support the work that you're doing. So if we can just go down the line and say where you're digitally located.
I'm at spashly.angelfire.
I currently write for the Fandomentals. It's fandom plus mental, thefandomentals.com. I also have a personal website, which is gnellis.com.
I'm on Twitter at EGBridges, and I also have a personal/professional website that's uncannyvalley.us.
It's really good. Actually, when I was doing my reviews of The 100 last year, I would read some of her articles, and then when I found out she was on a panel with me, I was like, oh my god, I can get to meet her.
And I'd like to shout out to Mo Ryan right now for quoting me in her article, because that's the reason I'm here right now.
Awesome. Yeah, no, storytelling is definitely something that's important to me, even though my medium is very different from all of you, so I really appreciate hearing your perspectives. I'm Charlotte Glass. You can follow me on Instagram, CBGlasser, and again, Hot Rabbit New York if you're interested in getting down with the queers at a party. So, okay, moving right on.
Wait. Is Mo Ryan in this room?
Yeah, right there.
Hey.
You guys!
Woo!
So we only have about 10 minutes left. Thanks for joining us, Mo Ryan. Appreciate it. We got 10 minutes, so I just want to open up for some question and answers. If you could raise your hand, I'll call on you, and we'll get some panelists to give you some insight on what you want front. So right here in the front.
So we typically in shows will see like one character who is, say, lesbian. So you get like the ambassador to Lesbotopia is Lexa in that show. So when she's gone, it's all gone, right? So, but what happens in a show like Orange is the New Black, where they did do things, does it still fall into that trope? Or because there's so many characters in that singular show, is it different somehow?
Jose's still dead.
Well, and also like
Spoiler alert.
Yes, and they still fall into the trope.
yes, and it actually, for me personally, for Autostraddle, I would love for everyone to go read our Orange is the New Black reviews because we had a lot of queer black women reviewing that and talking about the intersectional damage of killing off another black woman in such a violent way. And I don't want to speak over them or speak to that, but I think going to read those reviews is really important because not only are you falling into the bury your gays trope, but the damage that I think that does is it's hard. It's just horrible.
That one deserved a lot more.
Yeah.
A lot more publicity than it got.
Yeah.
Next question. Over there in the back, because I saw it before. Yeah, that's you.
I have a question. It's kind of the panel started talking about ethics and whether something was unethical. And you were specifically talking about the 100 situation as, actively courting a group, tweeting them that, like, watch the show, you're going to love what happens next. And then doing something that they really don't love is, like, kind of unquestionably unethical.
Right.
But would you guys go so far as to say that, like, I think we all know that just using tropes is lazy writing. But would you go so far to say that at this point, with where we are with queer female representation, that the bury your gays trope, or that these tropes affect how queer women or trans women are perceived, is in itself unethical?
Well, I think that, it's two separate questions, I think, for lesbian and bisexual women and trans women because, like, trans women on television have been mistreated so horrifically that it's just so far beyond, like, bury your gays. But in terms of bury your gays, one of the huge successes of the movement around Lexa is that there is no showrunner on earth who can now be like, I did not know bury your gays existed. Like, you know. So if you're doing it purposefully, and you're doing it knowing it hurts the community, and you're doing it knowing the backlash is coming your way. So, yeah.
I think right now in time, a showrunner would really be hard pressed to kill a character and not have it fall into the trope. I don't know how you could do it right now. I mean, maybe when there's more parody, when there's more representation, when it really is, any character could die, maybe.
What if a straight white guy with a vision does it, though?
Exactly. You take his vision and jump it.
I just don't think it's possible not to fall into the trope right now.
So yeah, I mean, I would agree. Like at this present moment, if someone were to use that trope, I would say that it is unethical because there's no way not to know how it impacts the community at this point.
And also,
and so if you are using it, you are doing active harm.
Yeah. And the justification for so long was that, like, we had so many, now we have so many characters, and marriage equality is a thing, and, like, Obama's changed the world. It's not like we're ever going to get Donald Trump as a president, so it's not, like, now you're doing it knowing that the political situation is as dire as it is, and so you're putting active harm into a world that is not the same world that it was even just 6 or 8 months ago.
And I would like to remind everybody that all those deaths were being written while marriage equality was being celebrated.
Mm-hmm.
So if just think about that for a second.
Right, and also because it is possible to have drama on your show, it is possible to write off a queer character from a show without killing them. Like, there is zero excuse for writing out a character by killing them, because there are plenty of ways to write a character out of a show without killing them. And one of the things I loved most was that I interviewed Kat Perrell for the website that I wrote for, and like when they wrote Winona Earp, they had no idea what was going to be coming. In what I call on the website I write for, I have dubbed it the spring slaughter. So it's like the spring slaughter of all of the women-loving women on TV. So they had no idea, but the fact that then Winona Earp exists, like you have a canonically lesbian character getting shot
With a vest.
With a vest on, and then Supergirl did that, like what is now twice, because Alex was shot in season 1, but that was before we knew, and Maggie. So like there are ways to like create drama without actually killing them. So again, to do it now is just to spit in the face of everything.
Right,
So, yeah.
like if you how many people in this room have drama in their lives, right?
And not because my friends are dying, like, or getting shot, or like.
We have time for 2 more questions. I want to make sure you guys get to tell us more advice. Here we go. We're gonna.
So, going forward from here, we keep talking about very gay trope, and I see television changing. We talk about Winona Earp, we talk about Supergirl. I guess going forward, if we can bury the very gay trope, one thing that I would be interested in knowing your views about is, okay, so they're not killing the character, but we're also not seeing the intimacy in lesbian relationships that we see in our heterosexual relationships. And as much as I love Supergirl, I think that they definitely fall into that. And so, I mean, at what point can we bury the very gay trope, say, okay, everybody knows about it, where do we go from here? And start building a conversation on showing true lesbian relationships and true lesbian experience.
I think we absolutely need to be having that conversation simultaneously with this one.
Yep.
There's no question about that,
Right.
because that's obvious homophobia that's happening there as well.
Yeah,
You know, oh, we're not killing him, so therefore you should be happy. You know, that's a really low bar.
yeah,
That's an incredibly low bar.
that's like the bar is on the floor. Right, and that, to me, I mean, that's part and parcel of the idea of ethics of storytelling, because ethics is not just about killing off queer characters. It's about how do we tell stories of anyone that belongs to any marginalized community. And it's not just about are we killing them or not. It's are we giving them space? Are we giving them
Screen time.
screen time?
Are we letting them have sex with the lights on?
Right?
Or sex at all.
Right? Are we giving them like happy, healthy relationships, or are they entirely dysfunctional? Which is another common television trope, is that if they're not dying, they're really unhealthy.
Hey, remember Lost Girl, when Bo and Lauren like kissed for the first time and it was fully bright in the room? I was like, what's happening? I didn't see it. Something's wrong with my television.
We have time for actually 2 more now because they just gave me the 5-minute warning. So right here in the front was next, and then we're going to you, and then y'all can make friends.
So sitting here, I'm gonna be completely honest. I've never seen the show, so I have no idea what you guys were talking about in terms of Lexa being killed off and anything. But I did get the gist of idea of with ethics and storytelling and telling the proper narratives. And I feel the rage on this end where you're saying we're not being represented more, you're not showing more of what we are and what we do and can do. But who is doing it right now? Have you seen a show or somewhere on TV or a movie where they actually did it right?
Winona Earp.
San Junipero.
Carol, director Todd Haynes.
I actually think that up until like the last, there are some episodes where it's better or not, but I actually think that Sanders on Supergirl
For the first half of the season,
is amazing and one of the best written stories I'd seen, especially about an older woman coming out. Like that was so well done.
One Day at a Time.
One Day at a Time.
Yeah, Orange is the New Black, I think, still definitely deserves your support, not only because it's telling a lot of stories with a lot of women of color. It's telling. May and Sadie both mentioned Transparent in the last panel for that show. Obviously has a lot of. It's really complicated. Again, you can read a lot of great criticism from trans women at Autostraddle. It's very complicated, but it's doing some really special stuff.
Steven Universe.
Yes.
Steven Universe.
I will say that to the day I die.
Steven Universe is doing it the best. Absolutely.
Oh right, yeah. They hands down. I would say hands down. Steven Universe is doing it the best on TV right now.
And do these shows, any of them are intersectional anyway across race, gender,
Steven
and sexuality?
Universe.
Steven Universe definitely is.
Steven Universe.
I would say.
And then One Day at a Time, which
One
is
Day at a Time.
yeah,
Definitely
which
One
is
Day at a Time.
yep, because it's about a Cuban family.
Okay, great.
And for our last question, please.
Speaking about ethical storytelling, what's your take, briefly obviously, on subtext?
Subtext.
Once you've had, for me anyway, once I had text, I could never go back.
Right. and there's in some ways there's not a lot of excuses now for a subtext. It's compared Steven Universe to Legend of Korra, for people who know Legend of Korra.
Yes.
Like Legend of Korra existed at a time when it was not acceptable to show woman-loving woman relationships on television. So it had to be subtext, otherwise they would literally not have been able to make the show that they did. Legend of Korra then, I think, actually opened the space for a show like Steven Universe. But now that Steven Universe exists, there's no excuse to go back. Like it's that step. Once you take a step that something can exist as text, there's no excuse for subtext. There's no excuse for subtext after that.
I'm still gonna keep reading Supercore fanfiction and Super Cat fanfiction. I love subtext fanfiction, but like, come on, like we've passed that point. When Steven Universe is a show geared toward children and it is doing queer relationships better than anybody else, like there's just no excuse.
Well, when mainstream media reviewers like TV Line can say like, "Hey, I totally thought Lena was going to kiss Kara," like if mainstream media is sensing that there's some like strong subtext there, like maybe it's time to actually do something.
You know, I looked this week because I was looking up the name of that actor who plays the character of Mon-El on Supergirl because. Like, and our recaps, Valerie just keeps calling him like all these kind of things like white bread and no ice cream. Anyway, I just looked up Mon-El and there were like 50 articles and they were like, Supergirl has a Mon-El problem. Like, and I was like, thanks, Gawker, you're right. Supergirl does have a Mon-El problem. Yeah.
All right, thank you guys so much. Please give us a round of
Thank you.
applause for our panelists. Really appreciate you coming out. Have a great time rest of this weekend. We'll see you at some other things.
Okay, wait, let's. Yes. Thank you so much. Yeah.